everyone! It's summertime and the sun is nice and bright in the sky, and it inspired me to do some t-shirt designs with photosensitive ink. The things you can do with this stuff is pretty cool, so I'm going to be teaching you a few different ways that you can use it, so let's get started. First, the printed method. You'll need your image, inversed, and printed on a transparency. It's recommended to print 2 of these and layer them on top of each other so that the black areas can block the light sufficiently. Masking tape, a shirt, a foam brush, light-sensitive ink. You can find this stuff at most craft stores, but if you're not able to, then I'll include a few affiliate links for this stuff in the description box below. Light-sensitive ink detergent. You'll need this stuff to properly wash out the underdeveloped ink from the fabric. Paper towels, gloves, a cardboard insert, a sheet of glass. Stick the cardboard insert into the shirt. Stack the transparencies together and tape them together. Mask off the area of the shirt where you want to print the image. You can use a ruler to measure it out so you can make the masked area perfect, but I just eyeballed it using the transparency as a rough guide. Glove up your hands, and make sure to do this next step in a well-ventilated room. Shake up the ink, pour it onto the masked off area, and spread it with the foam brush. Don't press too hard while you do this, or the fabric will start to bunch up, like you can see here. This was my first one, so I still had to get a feel for how to apply it. You don't have to be in a completely dark room, but avoid a lot of sun. I closed my blinds and turned off my big studio lights while I did this. Once it's spread all over, take some paper towel and blot up the excess ink. You still want it to be a little damp, but not soaking wet. At this point, you're supposed to take off the tape, but I totally forgot to do so. Yeah. If you leave the tape on, you get these weird wrinkles around the edges. You'll see later. Thankfully, this is the only shirt that I made this mistake on. Place your transparency on the ink. Put the glass on top and take it outside. Put your shirt on a flat surface outside and let it develop. I used a huge piece of glass here, which was totally unnecessary, and actually it probably messed up my shirt a little bit. The glass is there to press the transparency down so it develops nice and crisp instead of all blurry. But since I used a big piece of glass, most of it was off of the shirt and leaning that way, so it wasn't pushing down on the image as much. Also, please be really careful with the glass. As I was lifting this big piece, it ended up breaking because I wasn't properly supporting it, which sucked. Make sure nothing is casting a shadow onto the image or that will show up in the print. Anyway, let it develop as long as the instructions for the ink say. The stuff I have says to let it develop for about 12 minutes on a bright, cloudless, sunny day, and 20 to 30 minutes if it's a cloudy day. Once it's fully developed, take it inside, and here's what we have. It's pretty blurry and the transparency shifted a little bit while I was adjusting the glass halfway through, so the little crown at the top is double exposed. But even with those mistakes, I'm still pretty happy with how it turned out. Throw your shirt into the washing machine, set it to hot, and dump in 3 to 4 capfuls of the special detergent. If you're printing multiple shirts, you can let the washer fill up with hot water, put in the detergent, and then pause the wash. Then you can just throw each shirt in as you finish them. Here's another example of a shirt I did with another printed image. You can see that the fabric didn't bunch up as much when I spread the ink because I had a lighter touch. I also didn't forget to take the tape off this time, so I don't get those weird wrinkles around the edge of the image like with the last shirt. I did, however, mask off the area a tiny bit too tall, so it exposed a sliver of ink at the top and the bottom. I also used a smaller piece of glass so it would properly press the transparency down. Basically, everything that I screwed up in the last print, I did correctly for this one. Now I'll show you the shadow printing method. You'll need an object to cast a shadow. I'm using some fern leaves, masking tape, a shirt, a foam brush, light-sensitive ink detergent, paper towels, gloves, a cardboard insert, and a sheet of glass. Insert the cardboard into the shirt. Tape off a section of the shirt. I decided to go with the triangle. Apply the ink like before, and then blot off the excess with a paper towel. Remove the tape and arrange your objects however you'd like. When you're happy with the placement, take it outside to develop. If you're using plants, like me, or any kind of object that can be squished down, I would recommend that you put a piece of glass over to weigh it down, so that the image will be nice and crisp. Let it develop completely and take it inside and throw it in the wash. Next, this method is still technically the shadow method, but with sticker letters. You'll need sticker letters, masking tape, a shirt, a foam brush, light-sensitive ink detergent, paper towels, a glove, a cardboard insert, and a sheet of glass. Stick the cardboard into the shirt, tape off a section of the shirt. I actually skipped this part because I wanted more of a messy, brushed edge, and brush on your ink. I also decided to experiment with mixing some colors. I just squirted them randomly onto the shirt and spread it around until it was big enough to accommodate the letters. I wouldn't recommend mixing the magenta with teal if you end up making one of these things, because the teal ends up looking really dark, like basically black, which I'm totally fine with. I like how it turned out, but it wasn't what I was going for. After the ink was spread out, I blotted the excess ink up and started placing my letters. Now, you can totally stick the letters down first before you paint the ink on. In fact, I would recommend to do that. But I didn't for this one because I wanted to be able to spread the ink out in big, broad brush strokes and not get hung up on random letters. I don't think that I really achieved that look. I think I probably could have just dabbed the ink around the letters and still get the look that I got. The disadvantage of laying the ink down first is that the letters don't stick down well, so you have to use a piece of glass to keep them down. Anyway, like before, set it outside and let it develop. Once it's done developing, throw it in the wash. Here's another example of this technique, but I stuck the letters down first. So I stuck the letters down and then masked off what I didn't want to be dyed. Then I dabbed the ink on, blotted off the excess, and then removed the tape and the letters. And then I brought it outside to develop. Since I didn't need to keep anything pressed down, I just put this one out in the sun like this. Let it develop, and then threw it into the wash. And the last one is the hand-drawn method. You'll need a black paint marker, masking tape, transparency or a large sheet of plastic, a shirt, a craft-only Tupperware or mixing bowl, some water, light-sensitive ink detergent, paper towels, gloves, a cardboard insert, and a glass sheet. This was an experiment for me, and it didn't turn out like how I wanted, but I wanted to show it anyway because I might still be able to teach you guys something. Technically, I understand how it was supposed to be done and what I did wrong. I just wasn't successful this time. Get a piece of transparency or a sheet of plastic. I used a huge one because I wanted to try doing an all-over pattern on this shirt. If you want to do a smaller design, then you can totally just use a normal transparency. Use your paint pen to draw your design. Make sure to use a paint pen and not just a regular Sharpie. The paint pen leaves a more opaque mark. Use a few sheets of paper to cover where your arm and hand are touching the plastic. Your skin leaves oil on the plastic, making it harder for the paint to stick. Once you have it all drawn out, set it aside to dry. Now you can prepare the shirt like before by inserting the cardboard cutout, masking an area off, and applying the ink. But since I wanted to do an all-over pattern, I decided to completely dunk the shirt into a dye bath. So here's how I did that. The ink is pretty thick, so you need to water it down. I did 1 part ink to 2 parts water. You can adjust the ratios to have less ink and more water, and it'll give you more of a pastel color. For me, I ended up using the rest of the bottle, which was a little less than 4 ounces, and then about a cup of water. Pour the ink and water into the Tupperware or mixing bowl and mix well. Don't forget your gloves. Now dip in your shirt and completely soak it in the dye. Once you've completely saturated the shirt, wring it out as best as you can and stick the cardboard insert in. Lay it on a flat surface, put the transparency on top it with a piece of glass, and take it outside to develop. It was cloudy, so I let it develop for 30 minutes, and then since I was doing an all-over design, I flipped it over, covered it with the plastic, and then let that side develop for another 30 minutes. So here's where I went wrong. I don't think that I mixed the ink and the water enough, so there were spots that were less concentrated than others, making the overall dye job blotchy. I used a cardboard insert that wasn't completely flat. This may not have been a big deal if I was doing a smaller design, But since I was trying to do an all-over design, it caused the plastic with the design on it to not lay completely flat, which also might not have been too bad if I had a large piece of glass to weigh it down. But by the time that I got to this shirt, I had broken the large piece of glass that was intended for this method to begin with. I wrongly thought that I could get away with not using a piece of glass to weigh the design down. I thought my plastic sheet was going to be heavy enough, and it wasn't. Also, since I didn't have the plastic pressing down onto the shirt completely, there was a gap that allowed a lot of condensation to form, which also affects how blotchy the dye job is. Anyway, like the others, once it's developed, throw it into the wash. It's recommended to wash the dyed items with the detergent twice to make sure you got all of the underdeveloped ink out. Then you can dry it, and they're done. Here are the ones that I did. I hope you all enjoyed this project. If you did, please leave a like. If you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. I post DIY videos every Thursday. You can follow me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Pinterest, and I'll leave the information to those down below. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next week.